I'm Alan Kerwin. I am the Learning and Public Engagement Curator at the Butler Gallery here in Kilkenny. And we're delighted that you're joining us for today's session because it's kind of the curtains on our Pride programme for the past 2 weeks. And I'm sure many of you have taken part in some of the other sessions we had online and some at site at the gallery. So lovely to have you here. As you know, we've put a program of the theme running throughout our Pride program has been diversity and opening up that concept of what LGBTQ plus means, and that sometimes it can be seen as quite stereotypical or quite stasis in what it might mean for many people. And we've looked at that through the visual arts, through music and performance, through writing and literature. And today is the turn of film and screen, the moving image. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a stellar group of people here today who really are kind of at the cutting edge of diversity, particularly within queer film and cinema. Seán McGovern is the creative director of Gaze, the Dublin International Queer Film Festival, but also in a much wider way has worked on programming at Fringe, has worked at the BFI film programming, so quite an array of strings to his bow. Rico Johnson-Sinclair is the equality lead at the BFI and also established Shout, the Queer Film Festival in the West Midlands, and CineQ, which was a particular festival initiative he set up to cater to intersex, transgender and people of colour queer in the north of England. Just the facilities were not there, and so he led on this completely. And posing the questions and holding it all together, I'm delighted to be joined by Pradeep Mahadeshwar in Dublin. And Pradeep is the art director of Groupon in Dublin. He is a writer, he's a visual artist, and also is a contributor to GNC, Gay Community News. And I've been avidly following Pradeep's documentary essays and interviews that he's been doing with first and second generation queer people of colour in Ireland and their experiences. And it's been a fascinating series of articles and reads. So of course it's webinar focused today, so you won't be able to see each other, but you'll see the speakers and they won't be able to see you. And do please pose questions, and I will come back towards the end of the discussion and put them to our panelists. And do feel free to put them into text or send them privately, and I can pick them up there, whichever you prefer. So Pradeep, I will hand over to you to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you, Seán and Rico. I'm Pradeep, he, him. I'm from India, and I lived in different cities like London, Prague, and Seattle. And currently I'm living in Ireland. I'm artist, as Alan just said, and I will ask you some questions. And I know your work and following you guys, it is inspiring. So feel free to stop me to if you want to add anything or suggest a few more points in the discussion. So as a person of color living in predominantly white society and plus gay, it is not a good combination. And plus you are as an artist, it becomes more vulnerable position. So I just want to ask you guys, you have the place and power to address these questions. Like we read and listen a lot about inclusion, diversity, equity, and equality on social media, or it sounds really exciting on paper, but actually the process of filmmaking, some authentic creative process like filmmaking, which involves funding, creative collaboration, and also when you create that body of work, the challenge is to how to go to the film festivals or cinemas. So how do you see all this scenario for marginalized communities within the queer landscape?
I think it's so. I think it is already happening, but the problem is because so much of the industry is money driven, and additionally the people and organizations in positions of power are so closely attached to the government. Like the BFI is an arm's length government body. I think that there needs to be kind of like some consciousness around this work being done quietly, and additionally because the mainstream media are kind of out to get all of inclusion workers, and we've seen that over the last year. There has to be like an element of almost opacity to the work. So, but the things that the BFI are doing, like we've got the diversity standards. I definitely think there needs to be more around accountability, and I think that's why organisations like Sour Lemons, who are an incredible Black-led organisation that come into organisations in the cultural sector and make sure that anything you're doing is publicly accountable. So adding organisations that are Black-led is a way to make sure that you're being equitable, and actually ensuring that accountability comes from a place of authenticity. I think anti-racism practice is difficult because before you change the industry, you've inherently got to change people, and I think we need to be conscious of the fact that going from nothing to something is always going to be performative in the first stead, because there's nothing else it can be. If you as an organization or you as a person weren't doing anything until the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, then there was an external force that galvanized you to act in a specific way. So in that process, there's always going to be a level of performativity. But if you can, during that period of time of performativity, really look inside yourself and do the internal work to understand why the work is important, then you get to anti-racist practice. So I think there's a lot happening in the film industry. I think it all needs to be joined up. I also think that radical listening is super important. Sorry, I'm just reeling all those points off, but I think that radical listening is also really important. We're not doing enough listening without buts, and we're not removing the filter that we've all got inside, which stops us from acknowledging things we don't agree with or isn't our personal experience, and that hinders the work. So yeah, to go back to what your question, I think that there is work happening. It's small work that needs to evolve out, but actually, like, all of this work being done in the right way is a fairly new concept across the film industry, and also tying it back to how the industry itself can capitalize on this, because that's essentially the thought of the industry, not the thought of me personally or like the BFI or people that work in the industry, but the industry is money driven. It takes time. It's a slow process.
Yeah, I mean, Rico says something like very important and prominent there, which is that film is a money-driven enterprise. It is a commercial art form. You are being asked to part with your hard-earned money to sit down for however many hours in a institution that says this is the work that we're presenting to you. The BFI is a particularly interesting organization, because not only are they a cinema, an exhibitor, but they're also the funding body for film in the UK, the main funding body, and also, as Rico said, they're kind of it's like a public funded but government arm's length organization. So in many ways, they are partly responsible for the changes that they want to see enacted in Britain, at least, and internationally, to the films that they create. And that's really good. I'm a film exhibitor, so I'm kind of like part of this ecosystem, but very small down, really, because we don't actually fund any, we don't fund things, we present things. And in many ways, what Gaze does is we present a kind of a combination or a picture of what a year looks like, with a few nods back to either repertory film or classic works, or works that need to be seen again and reappraised. So Screen Ireland, I know, is in their own way addressing diversity and inclusion from an Irish point of view. And the thing about diversity and inclusion is that it's not just about, say, one particular ethnicity or skin color. It's also about the proportion of women filmmakers, people from the traveling community who are either can find themselves represented in content that gets created out there. So like, it really is it's a word that means different things. It should mean different things because it's complex to different scenarios. As a film programmer, as a person who puts these things together, so I have to think of a couple of things. I do have to think about money. I have to think about how much I get to spend and how much we can generate through bums on seats. But also as a programmer, I am tasked, personally and also from the job, to present the most kind of diverse set of films possible. Because the thing is, like, if I really wanted to, I could do a whole festival that's just cute white boys with muscles kissing and coming out. I really could, but that would be very unwise for me to do. But also, it would be incredibly boring. Let's just put that out there. The thing about film festivals is that you're asking people who like visual storytelling and who usually would take a chance on things. Well, you're asking them to take a chance on things that maybe they wouldn't. But you're also saying, here's a film for you, because you are represented so rarely, apart from the one annual film that Hollywood blesses to say this is the gay movie this year that you can go and see. And so from my perspective, not only am I trying to present a kind of a diverse series of stories, but we're also trying to have communities like myself, like an ordinary, he, him, gay, cis boy who wants to kind of connect to a story. But, queer audiences have been connecting to stories for decades because we imbue our own lives and perspectives onto heteronormative cinema. And we've been doing it since cinema began, So, just in turn, to bring it back to like diversity and inclusion, I mean, I want, like, my attitude, I'll tell you my secret to programming, which is if you include as much of every kind of thing as possible, then no one can really pin you down, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Like, diversity and inclusion for me means cinema from Iran, okay? It means cinema from Eastern Europe. It means films from like non-binary filmmakers, non-binary actors who are on the national identity, gender, sexuality spectrum. I want shorts, I want features, I want documentaries, I want experimental work. And what they do is they kind of create a tapestry of what the LGBT storytelling looks like in cinema of that moment. And the more you have of everything, well, then the closer you are to conveying some kind of truth what the world's like.
That's really interesting, actually, because I mean, when creating Cineq, so the way I see inclusion and diversity is because our industry is fundamentally backwards, because it's a money-driven industry. You have to prove an audience for something before money gets given to that thing to be made. So by creating safe spaces for queer, trans, and intersex people of color, or for women, or for intersex people, and like shining a light on the communities that have previously been underrepresented, what you're actually doing is developing an audience, because people trust your perspective and your voice, and you're developing those audiences to prove that there is money that can be invested into these communities for them to tell their own stories. So it's a really powerful medium, and that is something that also I try and aspire to as a programmer, because you need to carry that with you in everything that you do.
Absolutely. I'm being part of this film festival in Mumbai, and you can see India is such a diverse landscape from east, west, north, and south. So if you see those queer movies in the landscape, there is so much variety, diversity, and you can see different subject, and mainly it is astonishingly to see how they address this non-binary through their cultural meaning, rather than more gender politics. So here come my next question. When you just say, Seán, that you would like to see or exhibit films from different countries and geographical locations and cultures. So as an immigrant who lived in UK and in Ireland, what I see, different as an artist. How do I say the different? Like people often or look at immigrants who are like students, or they are doctors or nurses, or who work in food industry or service industry to deliver food as a uh, uh, delivery. And it's not only about creating art, but people don't look within the community. They don't look like people of color, immigrants, as a friends, as a dates, or as a partner. So film is something that such a significantly important political and cultural tool that it can create positive images, positive messages. So how can we build this big gap between like people migrate for some reason, but then they box into that their role limits as a spectator. You don't see them as a writer or creator or creating films or directing stage, even if they have potential. So what could be someone like BFI who is creating this software of films, and someone like Gaze that gives platform to telling the stories. So how can we build this gap to give the voice and power to the local talent?
I think there are two different strands to this question. I think there's the strand where you have to be engaged in film to know that you want to progress in film, and we see this a lot with like a lot of the film activities coming out of places that have a 3-screen independent cinema that shows the kinds of films that, you know, galvanize people to join the industry, and places like Birmingham that don't have a 3-screen indie and only has 2 venues that 1 screen shows independent film, and they're all very kind of like old white, like over 40 demographics, so you feel uncomfortable as a person of color or an immigrant or a disabled person within those spaces. And so really it's about whetting appetites and making sure that we're well, in one strand, it's about whetting appetites and making sure that we are represented on screen so people from those perspectives can enjoy film and understand it as a political tool, because you won't want to work in film if you don't enjoy film and you don't enjoy spaces that film happen. I think that's the first thing. But then on the reverse of that, I think that the BFI it could do better, like anyone in the industry, it could do better. But I think that with the introduction of the film hubs, the regional film hubs, that resource is there. We're not doing enough outreach to make sure that people can find us. But additionally, I would say that the resource is there. So the film hubs you've got like Film Hub Midlands and Film Hub North and Film Hub Northern Ireland and Screen Scotland, and like the various different hubs that are kind of part of the film audience network of the BFI. So they exist all over the UK, and they have 2 strands. You can either work in exhibition or you could work in production, and the production is like Film Academy, which is for like young people getting into film, network, which is about emerging filmmakers, and Film Fund, which is about feature film and development. And those exist, and the training and the resources there do exist with each hub. So there are regular opportunities for you to do things like, you know, script camp or engage in a lot of activities if you're looking to become a filmmaker. But again, there isn't enough outreach, and there isn't enough like targeting of communities that are underrepresented in society. It's more of like a let's put this on and then hope that people from underrepresented groups come and engage with us. And so that is something that the BFI are constantly looking at and trying to analyze through data. Data is such a really like important resource in our organization. But I've really felt the effects of that as a programmer, as a filmmaker, because I produced a film through Network, and I'm currently writing and directing another film through Network, and understand that the skills aren't there in the industries, because, you know, I want to create a film in an equitable way. My film is about racially motivated sexual assault. So obviously I want my production to be as representative as possible, as queer, as Black as possible, because it lends to authentic storytelling. But it's really difficult because, you know, the level of skill that that exists in our communities is low because we're under-resourced. And so there needs to be more energy put into that. It's a simplistic way of putting it, but yeah, there needs to be more energy put into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to hear the things that the BFI is capable of doing, but that's also considering how large, diverse, and populous the UK is compared to Ireland. And I'm really glad that they're doing those initiatives. And obviously, nothing is perfect, but the BFI have done a great amount of work to redress the balance of who gets to tell the stories. And congrats with the film, Rico, and the next one as well. I mean, yeah, again, I can't speak on terms of the funding, but what we're trying to do is that, like, I think that the backbone of any film festival, really, where actually you'll see the most diverse and impressive content is in the shorts programs. I've always thought that's the case, which is why they're usually such kind of big hitters and sellouts at any film festival, because we get like 8 or 10 films for the ticket price, but also I think it's where the most brave and daring film takes place. And the thing about queer cinema in general is that you don't often get rich from it, which is really tough. You know, it's people who put time and money into these things. You hope to God that they get a very good festival circuit. It's very hard as a programmer to kind of reject things, because obviously we ask for films to be submitted to our festival, in which we will then assess and program. And very often there are things that, you know, don't make the cut even though they are very good. And I often think that where you get the most kind of diverse storytelling and filmmaking, really, in terms of the people who are behind and in front of the camera, is in the shorts program. And so this year, what we're trying to do at Gaze is that we are working towards a in-person film festival, because that's what we do. You know, the cinemas are already open in Ireland; they better stay open. And but with knock on wood. But with that said, you know, last year was an opportunity for everyone to learn to do something that no one wanted to do, really, which is to turn your film festival into an online festival. So while we're primarily going to be in cinemas this year, we want the shorts programs to all be accessible on a platform as well as in the cinema. So that means that people who can't come to Dublin, obviously, will be able to see it. And we are going to use the small amount of funding we have for accessibility to really focus on something this year, because you know, I've been to several kind of accessibility webinars and stuff, and the one thing that people who know more than I do say, and they say very sternly, is don't promise the world in one go, and don't try and change it either. And so what we would like to do this year is to have all the films that are on that are in the shorts programs that are available online to have captions for them as well. Now, I've said it out loud, so I better do it. And that's kind of the way we're going, because in terms of like I said, the shorts programs, you often get the most interesting filmmaking, you often get the most diverse kind of storytelling, and you get some you get to see kind of the raw talent that isn't you know, working towards that isn't part of the feature film industry, which is a different kind of kettle of fish. So yeah, so that's where I think you can change the world. And I recommend, if you want to see a different kind of storytelling, to buy your tickets for the shorts programs, all of them.
Amazing. And Rico, congrats for the project, and all the best. And thank you, Seán, giving this Ireland perspective of exhibiting of films. So my another question comes from this immigration and I can see the pandemic point of view. A lot of things have done in last 5 years, you say, or 6 years. There is a fundamental law change in immigration in UK, and then Brexit happened, and then now the pandemic happened. So people are still coming, people are still migrating. But engaging with culture is changing. And when I go out there, I don't see some stories that I can find interesting or telling the issues of immigrants. And that is one of the main, if you see this housing conditions, suppose in Ireland, telling you, like people come here as a student or work, but they can't afford to have a proper housing system is there. So how do you see this? How do you see this cultural impact? Impact of all this happening on the culture and queer culture, and especially in the entertainment and creating something new. We are looking a lot of things on small screens now, mobiles and laptops. So what will be the future of producing something for a big screen and exhibiting on big screen? We don't know if the lockdown will come back after 3 months or 6 months, or and again we'll go back to our laptops and screens. So how do you incide the future of this creative process for queer industry?
Well, I think you should always think big anyway, and you know, make work for the biggest screen possible, and if you have to shrink it, it'll still look good. I mean, I've had many, as I cycle my bike, I often have my most perilous thoughts, and one of them is like, what's going to happen to the way we view things. You know, I've been called a bit of a cinema evangelist, partly because I believe that the most impact can happen when you have the most people in the room at the same time, and you can have those conversations afterwards, and you can maybe meet the filmmaker, or you could have a discussion. Very often, if you you can't do everything, obviously, but you know, sometimes films lend themselves to kind of a post-show discussion. What the internet has allowed us to do with the creation of the small screen is that it means that things can be shared in ways that they previously could not, and films often have much more of a kind of a lifespan afterwards, as part of the kind of the online film festival. I mean, there's an awful lot being made, but in many ways there's still kind of a lack of certain things. And personally, I think that you know, creating the space for these things to be told is important. And Rico might know this, but so I for years, where I really learned to cut my teeth was in the Fringe Queer Film and Arts Fest in London. And Fringe is very much kind of like the scrappy younger brother to, or scrappy genderless sibling to BFI Flair. And the one thing I loved about that is that there are films that, you know, might not necessarily that might have more of a DIY feel about them, or maybe their scope is a little bit more particular, or, you know, the subject matter a little bit, I don't know, just doesn't really, because the thing about programming is you're trying to create something, trying to create a bigger story based on lots of small pieces. And the thing about a fest, the thing about Gaze being Ireland's only kind of national LGBTQ film festival, is that we also want to show the best of the best. And I want things to look great, to be great stories, to be representative of things. And then like I said earlier, saying no to certain things is hard, you know. So what I would love to see, and what really could be helpful to these things is in Ireland anyway, is the smaller film festival. Like, I've thought that maybe when my time with Gaze is over, I'll help, you know, start the Fringe of Ireland, you know, which is much smaller, much cheaper, a volunteer run with no money, but does amazing things. And I think in order to get a diversity of stories out there just needs to be more opportunities. So smaller festivals with different kind of content that they screen, and also seeing where things go on the smaller screen online.
Wow, welcoming this is such a lovely thing you just said, that yes, Ireland needs some smaller and more integrated festivals where all films get scope for showcasing.
I think it's interesting that you spoke about Fringe as well, because it's volunteer led, which means it's open. So anyone that wants to go in and learn how to program can like volunteer for 3 years and kind of get a really good understanding of what goes into a festival, because you're involved across it. You're involved in every single facet of it. And although I can't answer the question as the BFI, because I'm an arm's length government body, so that would be really difficult. I can answer the question as Cineq and as a filmmaker. And I think that by involving many different groups in the work that you're doing, you'll have authentic representation. But I also think off the back of that, I think there's always going to be gatekeepers in this industry, because the industry was built by white people, speaking frankly. And so as someone from an ethnically diverse background or from a marginalized community, you have to go into it with the perspective that you need to build your own economies and your own organizations, because you can't wait for the industry to make space for you. In fact, it's the other way around. Once you build these economies for yourself, the industry goes like, oh, there's money to be made here, and then they engage you. So it's actually, I mean, it's super awful, but that is the truth of the industry. So it's about not waiting, I guess, about building it yourself.
Absolutely. I just
add to that as well. Like, I often feel that, you know, when we speak about particular terminology, that we're looking for certain kinds of films and certain kinds of filmmakers, like it can often be the case that there's like a white person behind that message, you know, and that I sometimes feel like this, the personal thing that I've struggled with a little bit is that I have a responsibility as myself and as a person in this film festival to be as inclusive as possible, you know, and I have to go out there and I have to look, and you have to see, and you have to also say no to things as well. Like, again, because it comes back to, it's like commerce, taste, curation, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes just because something, you know, something might be a few particular current acronyms or terminology, sometimes you still have to say no to it. And I sometimes feel that like I personally feel there's an inauthenticity sometimes to go out there and say, I'm looking for this and I'm a white person. You know, I know what I'm saying because I'm in this position to you know, to say it. And my attitude to things, as Rico said, it really should just be to listen and to learn, to look and see what's out there, rather than sometimes pushing an agenda. I really want these things, but I don't want to say that I'm interested in terminology rather than in stories and art. And I am primarily in the stories and art. It's just, yes, I do acknowledge that there also has to be a concerted effort to make these things happen. But I often worry a little bit about authenticity in terms of who is making these calls, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I come across, and I have spoken with many artists like me who are not from here, like Irish art, Irish film. So we won't fit in that bracket, though people are living here for 28 years or 12 years, or someone like me who is living here for 9 years. My art, my illustrations, it has always been seen as something that is like very few people have interest, because this is created by someone who come from outside. So though all my stories are based now on my experiences with this country, with this land, with this air, with this water, and still it is so it has become frustrated. So all this terminology, like this nationalistic terminology, it just bring you down. And then when you go for applying for funding, it become more critical, because every stage you have to deal with this unseen elephant in the room, because you're not from here. So why are you asking for funding at the first place? What are you creating, and how it is valuable? And then it comes to this point that people who are making the decision to show these things, first fund this thing and then show these things, how much they are aware about this inclusion and diversity, or how much they are aware of what is the term called Irish art or Irish cinema, and it is just frightening. And then many people I have seen of last 6 years, they just stop doing art, or they just stop writing, or they just stop even talk about it, because they know that it is not going anywhere. So that is another really big disappointing challenge in front of queer people of color who are and artists who are immigrants also. So I would like to ask you one last question, and then I can go to the question. So Seán and Rico, when you begin this career as a filmmaker, especially Seán, when you choose this career or you got aspire to work in this industry, do you have this understanding that you at some point you will have to answer these questions, because you come from predominantly white culture, white society, and you will end up working with the industry, which is a variety of people. People come from different walks of life. So how do you prepare yourself? And also, Rico, for you, when you come to industry with understanding that people might be not good to me, or they won't be accepting for me. So how do you prepare yourself, what you learn, and what you both will tell to the future exhibitors or future funders or future creators who would like to do this queer art? Gosh. And show the queer art?
That's quite a big question, really, Pradeep, if I'm honest. And I mean, I just, like, how do I prepare myself? Well, I just loved stories, and I loved the visual story form and film history and film culture and the soft power of film and what it does. And how did I start off? Oh, I started off as a volunteer at Gaze, actually, in 2008, perhaps. And that was the very, very first film festival ever. And it was also the very first time I saw experimental work and saw, you know, queer cinema, if I'm honest. Let's just call a spade here. It was the first opportunity for me to see that. So I prepared myself by, like, I learned everything I know in the world from the movies, you know, and some books, but mostly the movies. And my lovers too, of course. But like, I think, how do you prepare yourself? Well, you get in there and you work, and you often don't get paid for it. And, you know, like, I don't actually have a full answer for that. And you try your best. And maybe when you get into a position of power, you should open it up a little bit more. And I think that, like, to be fair to a lot of organizations, sometimes they don't open things up because they have a system that works and it's hard and they don't have enough money, you know, and you say you got to do what you got to do. And so this year for Gaze, for the first time in quite some time, we've had some paid interns to come in, a couple of young talented people getting paid for their work to help shape the narrative of what the film is going to, what the film is going to be like this year. And eventually they'll get to a point where I've done Gaze for enough. This is my second time doing it. Maybe I've got one more in me, 1.5 maybe. And then I'll say, okay, now it's time for you to take over. But very often there isn't a you there who knows what to do, because it's not just about programming. It's like Rico was saying, that you can learn to program at Fringe. That's absolutely true. But they also need people to operate soundboards and to make DCPs and to, you know, help set up the venue and to deal with guests and all these various challenging things. And like, I just think there should be opportunities either to volunteer, to be paid for your work, and to learn, and then eventually for someone to say, okay, well, now I'm done. It's time for you to take over. Like, I already have a job, you know, and gaze is my second one, and it takes up a lot of my bandwidth sometimes, and it can be very challenging and draining. But at the end of the day, I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not doing it for any kind of title either. I'm doing it because I love bringing these stories to different people, and eventually I'll want to rest and I'll say, okay, I can't do this anymore. And what you'd hope is that there are people coming up behind you who will be able to take the reins, and that is, I think, what should happen.
Oh.
I definitely agree with that. I come from the same perspective. Like CineQ is my other job and the BFI is my main job. And actually I do CineQ on my own. Like I am CineQ because there aren't people there to that work can fall on. And even like moving to London, I am conscious that there's a certain inauthenticity for me being in London and programming a queer, trans and intersex people of colour festival in Birmingham, but there isn't anyone there to take it over. But in answer to your question, I think that how have I prepared for my role and what I face? I think it's rage. I think my life has given me exactly the tools through like trauma and even like positivity to weather this industry. And I, for the longest time, used my rage to internalize racism and to internalize homophobia. And it wasn't until I remember the film, it was Tongues Untied by Marlon T. Riggs, that I watched, and allowed me to unpack a lot of that internalized homophobia and internalized racism, and used the rage that I now didn't internalize and wasn't within myself to go into this industry and disrupt, because that's what I essentially do. And knowing that like I can't get fired as long as I'm hitting my targets and doing my job, but how I do my job is completely up to me. And I don't need to be liked in the industry as long as I'm making it better for anyone like me who, you know, couldn't get into the industry or, you know, had to wait until they were 20 years old to really find their love for film because cinema's ticket prices were so expensive that they had to resort to piracy to watch films. I'm doing this to save myself, to save my past self, but I'm also doing it to save anyone like me that's currently going through what I had to go through to get into this industry and just to find what I love. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
I just want to say that Tongues Untied, we screened it at Gaze 2019, back at the last normal one. And like, if you want any example of how film can be transformative for either the people it's intended for, people who made it, and for people who are not the subject matter, you know, either. Like, it's just one of the most powerful films ever made, one of my favorite films, and it is just like I think that it stands up as to what film can be, because it's funny, it's sexy, it's provocative, it's challenging, it's heartbreaking, it's all these things, and it's everything that film can be.
I agree.
Sorry, Rico, you're going to say something there?
I just said I agree.
No, a really insightful discussion, actually. It's kind of, I think Seán made the phrase earlier, a tapestry of storytelling. And I think that kind of sums up what the whole debate has been about for the past 45 minutes or so, is that it's trying to go beyond these boxes or these kind of, I suppose, strictures or boundaries. And if it's about good storytelling and including people in the storytelling seems to be your focus, that then it just makes good film. It makes good moving image. I do have some questions to put to you. Maybe you may have spotted them already. I think the first one's kind of aimed at you, Rico. You talked at the beginning about the funding scenario, the funding problem, and the question is: do you think the solution to the backwards funding problem is to have more people from marginalized and underrepresented identities actually working within the production studios and the funding companies themselves? Would this be a way around it, or are there other alternative ways to deal with it?
I don't think it's that simple. I definitely think that's necessary. I definitely think there should be more diverse voices in those areas. I think there needs to be more diverse voices in positions of power in the industry generally. But the systems that the industry is built on are fundamentally flawed to be inclusive. So actually, it's more expansive than that. I think the industry needs to be smashed to pieces and rebuilt for a modern age. I think that it's really difficult to do that when the people in positions of power want to hold on to their power. And I also additionally think that the most toxic thing about this industry, and don't get me wrong, I love film and I love this industry, but the most toxic thing about this industry is once you've spent a certain amount of time in the industry, you start to internalize the behaviors around you. So actually what's happening is like young people are going into the industry wanting to be disruptors, wanting to change things. They work for 10, 15 years in the industry and have to internalize the behaviors around them to survive in the industry. And then they take over positions of power and do exactly the same thing. So I think it's more of a formative intervention that needs to happen, but I don't know what that looks like because, again, my remit has been largely for a really long time exhibition. And although I'm really familiar with the film chain and really understand the way the film industry works, I haven't experienced its culture for long enough to make a decision on how best to smash it apart without affecting, you know, people in exhibition who are literally godsends, and people in production who are doing the work. And the film chain is fundamentally flawed because, like, you start with, you know, production, then you go to sales, who often get involved in production and tell you to change your story to make it less original, so it's more sellable. And then you've got distribution, who are in charge of where the film goes. Then you've got exhibition, and then the money gets fed up from exhibition up the chain. So production's the last person to get it, if they get anything, but they're the person at the head of the creativity. So yeah, there needs to be more formative work done in the industry generally. But as for what that looks like, I couldn't say at the moment.
Yeah, that it needs to.
Yeah, it is challenging.
It needs to be taken apart. Seán, would you concur with that, or have you come across a different system of possibility?
No, I mean, Rico has answered that.
It's pretty straightforward. The other question, I think, for both of you, what do you think is the big hurdle at the moment to overcome in the industry? Would it be getting diverse performers and stories on camera, or behind the camera in supporting roles? Which would be more significant?
I think it's both. It's a two-pronged approach, isn't it? But like, the thing about everything is like, where do these people come from? How do you get them? Do you know, like, you know, we talk effortlessly, ceaselessly about like audiences and diverse audiences, and things come down to, what it comes down to always is money and time and capacity and location and geography. And it's hard, because if we really wanted to address these things, we pump a lot more money into it, but there's not enough money for these things, you know. But I know that Kilkenny is an incredibly creative and cultural city. It's one of my favorite places. A lot of my closest friends are from Kilkenny. Like Kilkenny, I think, was a real kind of standard bearer for like creativity and film culture in a county that isn't Dublin or Galway or Cork, you know. Like, and like my friends from Kilkenny, you know, they were all involved in like the filmmaking groups when they were teenagers, and like, we didn't have that in Longford. You know, like, it's a geographical thing as well, and there are places where these communities exist. Like, there are places where they have higher traveller proportions than other counties do, and I guarantee you that they're not the places that people are reaching out to.
I have one point to this question. There's one of the least interested and least discussed topic is that national integration policy for immigrants. So this is so we are not preparing any talent. We are preparing workers. They work in banks, they work in hospital, or they work to fix your tooth or give you food from Deliveroo. But we don't have that policy that open up these people who come here and spend their generations to give them platform to go to these fields and create this talented bunch, or just provide talent to industry. So it is there is no scope. It's like, if you ask me as an immigrant person, I will tell you right away, there is no scope. So expecting that you will get that diverse performance in front of camera, and the diverse technician and diverse exhibition, it is just like talking in it's just like empty talks.
Yes.
It is not going to be happening.
Yes, I know. I think I take your point, Pradeep. It's a case that it's a bit like what Rico said about the funding system, equally with the training and the awful word integration policies, which I would have a problem around the use of that kind of terminology. I think that needs to acknowledge that, you know, people who are coming as workforce or migrant or immigrants actually have creative lives, are producers as well as consumers. And I think that's going to be a long-term structural thing that needs to change, which kind of Rico has hinted to in the funding scenario behind film.
Yeah.
Likewise, in the bigger production of art and creativity, is to take a wider lens, which is more appropriate for what we're talking about. So I think Pradeep, yes, it's exactly, you make the point, relevant.
I would also definitely make a point that, like, yes, that is the case and that needs to change. But the UK as a whole is more focused on generating workers and not creatives. And actually, like, when working in this film industry, like me and Seán have said, you have to do your creative job alongside your whole other job because there isn't capacity for you to do it. And we also need to look at, like, the people who have, in going back to the original question, like, what's more important, people behind the screen or people in front of the screen? I think it's, in the first instance, it's neither, because I don't think that communities are adequately being resourced, and there isn't a consciousness around, like, if you want to become really skilled behind the camera, if you want to become a really skilled actor, it means you're going to have to go and do 3 years of unpaid work while also having a full-time job, and lots of people don't have capacity for that. And especially if they're, you know, have previously been under-resourced, it takes a lot more care, whereas people that may be more affluent or people that have resource or are more settled are able to take advantage of those. Like me being a queer man who hasn't spoken to my family since I was 16, I don't have the option of going back home and staying with my family and then spending 3 years to skill myself up to the level that I need to be at to join this industry. I have to do a full-time job and work 40 plus hours while also in three hours every evening and go to bed at 1 o'clock, write a script. So it is like that for the UK, and that needs to change generally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a change fundamentally. So recently I got Irish citizen, but before, you see, it was such a stress. Like, as you said, like, I have a full-time job and I have a team is in Chicago. I'm living in Ireland, so I had to always fluctuate my work time according to Sydney, Chicago, Dublin, and then after that I have the urge to create something, so I have to spend, and then I'm creating something, but there is nobody to acknowledge or see things. So it is such a pure frustration. Like, what are you interested in me as an immigrant just to pay the tax, right? So I'm coming here, I'm not getting a proper home, or I'm not getting gay friends because I'm outside gay and I'm not interesting, desirable Asian man. So all my gay life, and then we talk about this all day, being your authentic self. But where can I find my authentic self in this? You know?
It's like, yeah, I definitely agree, and I hard relate. I don't fit the status quo of what a gay man should be. Like, even though my pronouns are he, they, I also like take a point about like wanting the government wanting to invest in people that will invest in them, and that's definitely an issue. But I also think, again, going back to what I was saying about us building on our own economies and our own industries and our own creative art forms, it's been done. The Black and South Asian workshops of the 80s and 90s is like a really like strong movement of what can happen if we just do our own thing and don't have to prescribe to the government. And although they're only being acknowledged in hindsight, there's still a really powerful bonding experience and community experience for us that allowed us to get the skills to join the industry. So these are the kinds of initiatives that I am interested in. I'm not interested in I'm less interested in people of color joining an industry that will use them to capitalize on them. I'm more interested in people of color and disabled people and any marginalized group creating these spaces for themselves and doing what they want and becoming successes in their own right.
If I could just add one thing as well, you know, Ireland, she's always had a bit of an identity crisis. You know, she's still very young. She doesn't really know what she's doing. And, you know, if you ask the question of what was an Irish film 30 years ago, so let's say 1990, you know, what was an Irish film? It was set in a rural location, everyone was miserable, and everybody was, it was about land. It was the field, essentially, again and again and again, you know? And only since the 2008 financial crisis, I'd say, that when funding was decimated, the Irish film industry had to ask itself, what is an Irish film? Well, it's a European co-production. It is different kinds of stories. It's what does, you know, it asks the question of what is an Irish story and who are the audiences. And I think in the last, say, 15 years, you know, the Irish film industry has come in leaps and bounds in terms of content that's created and the people who are at the center of the stories. And I just think that, like, you know, I'm not trying to defend it here. I'm just saying that things are complex and things are hard. And I think the Irish film industry is asking itself the question of, you know, who gets to tell these stories, and it's focusing on both form and I know from things like the POV scheme, which was for female filmmakers, you know, it's addressing things at a time. And I think Pradeep really touches on something, is like, who am I with my Irish citizenship in this country? I'm an Irish person too. How can I participate in this? And I think the answer is that they don't know yet.
And I think on probably at that point coming up, it kind of sums up to come out of this. I think it rests a bit that it's in the hands of people to do it themselves, to push out there against the system. But also, I think there's kind of huge challenges, as you've all identified, and some of them quite tragic and entrenched challenges. But actually, the positive I've seen from listening to the three of you is that with Rico, Seán, with you guys doing what you do, leading these really kind of cutting edge film festivals and looking at these issues. Pradeep, you're writing about this a lot and you're pushing it in the Irish scene and you're opening up this for debate. This is a good thing. It's a way forward. At least it's happening. And so I would hope that at least in the Irish cultural sector, with people such as yourselves doing this, it's something to go forward with, and it's something for the sector to look at in a bigger way. And hopefully we would have some kind of positive engagement and move on. And really with our national arts organizations to listen to your experiences and what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of rests me to thank you, Seán, Rico, and Pradeep for asking the questions and bringing this kind of the entangled nature of it together. And thank you very much for joining us today and really finishing our Pride Festival for 2 weeks. It's been great to kind of go out with this really important discussion.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Rico, Seán. It was amazing to see you guys. And if you come anytime, Dublin, give me a shout.
Okay.
Likewise, Kenny, come and visit us at the Butler Gallery. Always welcome.
Alan, thanks so much. It was a great conversation, and Rico, we should hang out.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah. We should all hang out. Yeah, Seán's closer.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye.